This is the dieting mistake that every hybrid athlete makes. Most hybrid athletes are trying to run a deficit that is designed for someone sitting at a desk, that does cardio purely to drop fat, that has no goals other than fat loss. But your training changes that entire equation. In this video, I'm going to cover what that mistake is actually costing you and how to correct it so that you can finally start dropping fat, whether you're lifting and running or training for a Hyrox. I've been coaching guys who train like this for years. The hybrid guys who lift and run, they always have the training split nailed. Lifting and running on alternative days, tempo work, zone 2 work, all done to a T, but they all make the same mistake when it comes to the nutrition. They get themselves in a deficit, but the way they set that up is the same way that someone who sits at a desk all day just looking to drop a few pounds does. They don't account for the completely different demands on the body. Your deficit isn't what you think. A 500 calorie deficit makes sense on paper. You work out your maintenance using an online calculator, you subtract 500 calories, and that's 1 pound of fat dropped every week. And that does work, but only when the maintenance calculation is accurate. And for someone running 2 to 4 times a week and lifting on top, a standard TDE calculator is not going to give you an accurate number. Selecting moderately active on the drop down is not a description of your training load. There is a framework that will give you a rough estimate for guys like you, and it's all around energy availability, not just the gap between energy in versus energy out. The calories remaining after your training expenditure relative to your lean body mass. What's actually left at the end of the day for the body to do everything that it needs to. So to repair tissue, regulate hormones, and ultimately build the positive adaptations from the session that you just did. And research puts optimal energy availability at around 45 calories per kilo of fat-free mass per day. Suboptimal is 30 to 45, and below 30, hormonal function is measurably affected and recovery is impaired and performance eventually drops. The problem is a hybrid athlete running a standard 500 calorie deficit based on a maintenance estimate that is way under their actual training output can hit the suboptimal range without the headline number even showing it. Which is why your app says that you should be dropping fat and your body just seems to disagree. This is the extra layer that most people miss, and when you have as much output, especially at high intensity, as the hybrid guys do, overlooking it can significantly hinder your results. Compare this to the bodybuilders and the conventional dieters, the guys that most dieting advice is aimed towards. They can go as hard as they can tolerate the deficit. Hunger, low energy, feeling rough are all acceptable because performance doesn't factor into the goal. They are looking solely at fat loss, that is the only goal. But hybrid guys have an extra consideration because you might be able to tolerate the same deficit, but it will negatively affect performance. And even if you were okay with losing strength and running performance, doing so will start to affect the energy used as performance drops. And in turn, this will lessen the deficit that you've just built. Bottom line is if you're doing this much training, it has to be factored in, whether you care about performance or not, because it's one of the factors that will be driving the deficit. So we need to make some changes to how you're doing things. First up is how you distribute your food around training. For a standard fat loss client, nutrient timing is largely irrelevant. They hit the daily target, eat when it suits, and the outcome is pretty much the same. But for someone doing performance-based sessions, it matters. If those sessions are underfueled, the session quality drops. You're going to start to accumulate fatigue without getting the positive adaptations. So the session costs you energy and it doesn't return the stimulus that it should. And the fix isn't necessarily eating more. It's distributing what you're already eating more intelligently. Carbs before and after hard sessions. Same total calories for the day, just time more specifically. You're fueling the sessions and trying to create the deficit in between. The second change is deficit size. So when working out your rates of loss, I like to work off a percentage of body weight rather than a flat weight loss number. It's way more accurate for most people. I tend to aim for around 0.5 to 1% of body weight per week, not a fixed £2. So for a 200 pound guy, that's 1 to 2 pounds per week. And for a 100 pound female, that's 0.5 to 1 pound per week, which means it's going to be far more applicable to you. And the third thing is that you need to be way more focused with your goal, using a phasic approach to your training and your nutrition. So what this means is you set the diet to last 10 to 12 weeks, no more. And if that's not long enough for you to lose the amount of fat that you need to at this rate, then all you need to do is finish the 12 weeks, reverse diet back to maintenance for 4 to 6 weeks, and then you can diet again. And you can repeat this process until you're down to the desired body fat levels. But don't keep dieting past the 12 weeks because the longer you diet, the more cumulative hormonal and recovery damage you're going to cause. The rate of fat loss will slow as metabolic adaptation takes place, and you can end up in a far worse position. Short, sharp phases focused on a specific goal will yield far better results. If you want to know what your actual deficit numbers should look like as a starting point, I've put a free calculator in the description. You can put in your details, set your activity level accurately, not moderately active, the actual sessions that you're doing, the intensity of those sessions, and use what it gives you to give you a pretty accurate starting point. So what happens when you get the deficit wrong? Because most hybrid guys I work with are tracking performance metrics. Every single one of them knows the 5K time, the max deadlift, ski erg paces. Everyone expects that when they start to diet, those numbers are going to start to drop, but they actually hold for a surprisingly long amount of time, which sounds like a good thing, but potentially it's not, because the reason they hold is that when energy is scarce, the body will sacrifice recovery so that it can keep up with the output. So what goes first isn't the deadlift, it's the sleep quality. It's whether the soreness from Tuesday has cleared by Thursday. It's catching every illness that your toddler brings home from school. It's feeling beaten up after sessions that used to feel pretty manageable the next day. It catches everyone off guard because the performance data looks fine. And by week 5, your lifts are holding, your run times are pretty consistent, but every check-in has the same thread running through it. You're tired, you're sore, you're not sleeping well. Each one on its own can have an explanation. You've had a busy week, you've got a bit of stress, you've maybe just had a bad night, but several of these showing up at once and sticking around in a deficit with unchanged training volume is probably the body starting to tell you something. By the time performance drops visibly, the recovery hole has been there for a few weeks, and no one realizes what this does for fat loss, because once recovery is compromised, fat loss can start to stall. Your body starts to down-regulate fat loss mechanisms and spikes your hunger hormones to essentially restore the energy balance. So when you push the deficit too hard, thinking you're accelerating fat loss, it's actually doing the opposite. You can start to plateau despite still being in a deficit because the hormonal environment has started to shift. Protecting recovery directly protects the rate of fat loss. Going harder doesn't necessarily mean faster results. It can just mean that you essentially end up breaking down. And the metrics that are going to catch this early are going to be the recovery metrics, not performance. So things like sleep quality, how fast soreness clears between sessions, how your sessions are feeling, whether niggles start to appear or if they're sticking around longer than they normally would. If those are degrading, then something needs to change. Either reduce training volume slightly or bring calories up marginally and accept that a slightly slower rate of loss may occur. When in doubt, decrease the deficit. Don't increase your output to try and compensate, because that will just make the problem worse, not better. Remember, the deeper the hole you dig, the harder it is to get out of. You want to catch it at the small adjustment stage, not where you've dug a hole so deep that you're forced to take a deload. And once performance is visibly dropping consistently, the hole is already pretty deep. So what happens when you get the deficit right? If the deficit is set correctly, you get the grand prize. Your body fat comes down consistently. But what that actually looks like in practice isn't what most people expect. And the gap between expectation and reality is where most people end up adjusting too early, too aggressively, and usually in the wrong direction. In the first 4 to 6 weeks, dramatic visual changes are probably unlikely, but this is normal. Guys who are already training seriously won't get the initial drop that your Auntie Susan gets when she starts a Slimming World diet. That 4 to 5 pound drop from water and glycogen when she slashes her intake. Most of you guys have already got reasonably structured diets and training in place. There's going to be less low-hanging fruit. As a result, the early weeks might feel like nothing's happening when actually it is. So don't adjust in the first 4 weeks unless you're seeing an alarming dip in your recovery metrics. Give the deficit time to work before you touch it. When it comes to the scales, scale weight isn't linear. It's only weighing the mass on top of it, not the composition. So water, food volume, training load, they're all going to affect it day to day. The week-to-week average trend is the number that matters, not your weight the morning after a long run. The scale may stall in the early weeks while body composition is quietly shifting, but it can be completely normal. Measurements and photos will often show what the scale doesn't. And muscle retention is going to mean that the scale will potentially move slower than pure fat loss would suggest. That's what we want. When it comes to recovery, on a correctly set deficit, recovery metrics won't necessarily improve, but they also shouldn't be alarming. A slight dip in sleep quality, a slight increase in soreness between sessions is acceptable as long as it's not significant or consistent. But what shouldn't be happening is your runs consistently declining, noticeable weakness in the gym, picking up frequent niggles, your sleep being badly disrupted, constantly feeling like you need to pull a session or reduce the load. If those signs are showing up consistently, then your deficit is wrong. As you get to the back end of the diet, around the 10 to 12 week mark, a deload week is worth planning in. I like to time it with the start of the reverse diet, or you can even put one in the middle of your cut, somewhere around weeks 5 to 7, say, to manage fatigue that is building and give the body a window to recover before the final push. They usually help with hunger too, which makes the back end of the diet a lot easier. And finally, performance. This is the one that most people go into expecting to be a problem, but it usually isn't, or at least not in the way that people expect. Because performance during a correct deficit can be quite variable. It's not universally worse. Some athletes see no drop, some actually improve. Take running for example. Lighter body weight at the same aerobic fitness means a faster pace at the same effort. If you lose 4 pounds during the cut and your engine is essentially the same, your 5k time might actually improve before you've even finished the diet. Some guys will feel less lethargic as they start to adjust to the lower intake, and a lot of guys who weren't fully dialed in at maintenance find that getting specific with food for the first time, so tracking everything and planning, actually drives performance up even while the calories are down. Just know that a bad day isn't necessarily the deficit failing. It might be that food was slightly lower that day. It might be the accumulated fatigue, or it might just be a bad night's sleep. Look at the pattern across 2 to 3 weeks. Use the recovery metrics to look at trends. Don't let 1 or 2 difficult sessions throw you off. The expectations going into a diet matters more than most people realise, because if you tell yourself that you'll be starving, well, you're going to be starving. But if you volumise your food properly and structure the deficit well, you may not really register it much at all. Clients who go in expecting misery usually get misery. Clients who go in downplaying it, expecting it to be just a bit less food, usually find it a lot easier. What you expect, you largely create. And then when the cut is done and the reverse diet starts, performance chasing begins. This is the fun part. The bit of strength that dips, well, it comes back really quickly. What drops in a deficit is largely neuromuscular. So essentially, your nervous system being conservative when energy is short, it's not actual muscle or strength loss. Bring food back up and the numbers bounce back, sometimes even beyond what they were before the diet. Running also tends to rebound with a lighter body, so the performance after a good cut will usually be better than the performance going into it. So to summarise, set the deficit against your actual training load. Use carbs around the sessions that matter. Work in phases, especially if the cut needs to go longer than 10 to 12 weeks. Track recovery metrics during the cut, not just your performance numbers. Protecting recovery will protect fat loss. Have patience in the first 4 to 6 weeks. Read what the signals are actually telling you. And I've put my deficit calculator in the description if you want a starting point that's based on your output, not someone who sits at a desk all day who just walks for cardio, and it's completely free. And if this was useful, remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on more like it.